Thanks, Todd. Your comments on standards, of course, you're the right guy to be commenting on that. Perfect intro to what I'm going to be getting into here. Let's see. There we go. And I'm going to start out by pointing out that the web was not created for publishing. And when I point that out to people, that's the kind of reaction I typically get. It's like, what? But it wasn't. It was created for communication and selling stuff and finding stuff and making web pages, and the whole infrastructure and architecture of the web didn't really involve much consultation with publishers at all. Publishers really weren't in the room much when this was created. And that's really ironic because particularly at this point in time, scholarly publishers, us, this group of people, we're probably more online, and our contributors and our clients live and work more online than pretty much any other sector of publishing. We're way ahead of the curve compared to other parts. And I work with a lot of other segments of publishing as well, magazines and trade and educational, etc. Scholarly is way out in front. And yet, there are very, very few publishers or publishing organizations that are members of the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, which governs all the standards that we, live and die by today. There are actually very few publishers from any sector of publishing. So one of the things I want to do is proselytize a little bit to encourage people in this community to get engaged with the web and have some influence and make sure that our voices are heard as these standards are developing, because we're really often not part of the conversation. Fortunately, the W3C has actually recognized this and created what's called an interest group. Basically, the way the W3C is structured, there are working groups that are responsible for different aspects of the standards. Working group on CSS, working group on XML, working group on MathML, et cetera, et cetera. An interest group brings input to those working groups from the wider community. And maybe about a year and a half ago, they created what they call the Digital Publishing Interest Group to try to gather insight into how the web can be improved for publishing. This is a really good thing. This is why I point out to people that it wasn't designed for this in the first place. The reaction we often get is, do I need to worry about this? I actually don't really even think about my website very much. And as W3C tries to recruit publishers to join, particularly from top management, the technology people get it, but the top management says, no, we belong to too many organizations already, dues are too high, why do we need to worry about that? Well, what they're forgetting is that the web is really the basis for delivering publications digitally. It's not just about the website. So, what are the three options? How do you deliver digital content? You deliver it with an app, you deliver it through the browser, which is standard online delivery, or you deliver it to e-readers, which is actually getting closer to that one file works everywhere that Todd was dangling in front of us in his introduction. And behind almost all implementations of any of those modes of delivering digital content is the Open Web Platform, which people today colloquially kind of refer to as HTML5. But HTML5 technically is one of about 100 specs from the W3C that are encompassed in this concept of OWP, the Open Web Platform. XML, HTML, CSS, SVG, MathML, dozens more are part of this constellation of standards that govern how we work and how we do our jobs and how we communicate with our clients and customers. With kind of the three fundamental ones, just to make a basic distinction that helps you sort this out, is that technically HTML5 is the markup of the structure of the content. CSS3, that's cascading style sheets, is the styling. It's how you render that content. And it's quite separate now from the structuring of the content, which is HTML. And then JavaScript, which is the functionality. Those are kind of the three basic building blocks, but as I said, there's scores more. So The mission of this digital publishing interest group is basically to document use cases for things that publishers need to do that they currently can't do well enough using web technologies, and then working with the appropriate W3C working groups to update the specifications and standards to help address some of the shortcomings. So the areas that we're working on right now, there are 5. One is typography and layout. This is basically the goal there is to try to get closer to print quality rendering with cascading style sheets in the open web platform. And again, this is not necessarily just for a website. This is for an app. This is for an e-reader. This is for print. I don't have time, but I can give you some interesting examples of people that are actually using HTML and CSS to actually do all the print rendering, and quite beautiful print rendering, PDF rendering. Another subgroup within this is annotations and social reading. We're working very closely with, there's a larger W3C working group on this, and IDPF has an annotations working group, just actually releasing a draft spec today in New York. Accessibility and personalization. Obviously, that's a really important fundamental issue that's deeply important to publishers. Behavioral UI sounds a little geeky, but it's basically, the way to think about that is the things that currently the proprietary systems do to add on to functionality that isn't already built in. So the most obvious example is when you have a publication in iBooks and you have a footnote. If it's tagged as a footnote, iBooks automatically will create a pop-up for you. Well, that's not W3C doing that, that's Apple doing that. But we need that to just happen natively as part of CSS. And then metadata, that's the group that I'm trying to lead. It's a difficult area. And the focus there is mainly on schema.org, which I'll get to in a second. So anyway, the point is there's a working group, there's an interest group working on these issues. Hardly any publishers are participating in this because you have to be a member of the W3C to participate. I actually was able to participate because I was asked to be on this as an invited expert, but that actually expired. That's a temporary status, and a few weeks ago my time limit ran out as an invited expert. Luckily, I'm a committee chair of the BISG, the Book Industry Study Group, which is a member, so BISG said, oh, Bill will represent us on this group, so I'm still on it. But there are very, very few publishers. Hachette is a member, Pearson is a member, but the big STM publishers, come on guys, the web is really important to you, get in this conversation. The big societies, you can afford to do this, and you would make an invaluable contribution to this work because you know a lot of stuff. We've already solved a lot of problems that they're just thinking about. They don't, I won't belabor the point because I shouldn't take up too much time on this, but I can't tell you how many times I have to explain to people what a DOI is. They don't even know what a DOI is. And explain what Crossref is and how it works and what it does. They don't have a clue, because we aren't in the conversation with these people. And so all these fundamental standards are getting developed without our help and without our contribution. So anyway, end of preaching, but I really wanted to make a strong point about that. Here's another thing that surprises people. It's actually a lot easier to embed metadata in your files than you realize, and metadata in a way that can be natively understood by browsers, and that's what schema.org is about. This actually isn't technically a W3C standard. This was created by the major search engines and browser companies, Google, Microsoft, Safari, Mozilla, etc. Collaborated basically to create this organization called schema.org, which is a standard set of properties and terms for just describing things on the web. So, it describes events and dates and names and addresses, etc. Those are the obvious things that it has a standard way of marking up, this is the name of somebody, this is an address, etc. Well, this is a recipe, and this is an ingredient in a recipe, and this is the calorie count of this recipe. That's all. So if you go to Google and you Google potato salad, you'll see that there's a kind of an advanced, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there's an advanced search button that brings down, if you're searching for potato salad, it'll bring down ingredients, cooking time, calories, How do you think it knows those things about all this stuff that's out there on the web? It's the schema.org infrastructure under the hood is what's making that work. What they're doing is they're adding things that are more and more useful for publishing. So two things that were added recently, and as I described in my second line there, in effect what that gives you is faceted search happening natively in the browser. We're used to faceted search being in proprietary platforms that are created one by one. I don't want to represent this as a substitute for that because those are highly specific and highly engineered and incredibly valuable. But this is a generic way of doing very fundamental things that are relevant across lots of areas. So, for example, they've just added a whole group of properties for learning metadata, LRMI, Learning Resource Metadata Initiative. They've added a whole bunch of properties for describing accessibility features, et cetera. So these are things that are very useful. One of the things that my group in the DPIG is working on is what would be useful for publishers to be able to build into this so that the browsers natively know that I'm talking about this thing. And again, I can't stress enough that this is not just about your website. The open web platform is really fundamental to how content is developed, how it's discovered, how it's delivered. I showed you this slide before, but what I've added on the right there is that, yes, the open web platform is behind, the technology behind a lot of this stuff. Well, another thing that's important, and this gets, again, at something that Todd was mentioning in his introduction, is that the free and open and non-proprietary standard for delivering publications based on the open web platform is EPUB 3. I'm going to quickly zip through some things that I've actually done in previous presentations that some of you may have seen, but just as a refresher on what's the point of EPUB 3? What's this about? Well, the mandate, it has to be, everything in it is open, royalty-free. It's for all types of publications. It is not, its name is not ebook, it's EPUB. It's for any kind of publication. Enabling multimedia, interactivity, global language support. It's rapidly being adopted in Korea and Japan right now. Accessibility is very fundamentally built into this standard. The ability to do sophisticated design and layout and typography. It's backwards compatible with EPUB 2 so that all of those EPUBs that are already out there in the world are perfectly fine. They just can't do all these cool new things, but they can do what they were designed to do, and they still work on every system. And the architecture is modular and extensible. So what are the key features? Thing that most people get excited about is the ebooks can start looking decent, and they can do things that aren't just plain vanilla fiction or simple nonfiction. Video, audio, animations, interactivity, we'll get back to that, particularly the educational scheme in a minute. Multiple style sheets and responsive design so that one file can work one way on a laptop and another way on a tablet and a third way on a phone without needing three different files. One file that understands the orientation of the device and what's called the viewport, basically the real estate that it has to display, and change how it displays to adapt to what the user is looking at. Really, really useful. And this is not rocket science. We do this every day. We create EPUBs like this all the time. Right to left vertical flow. This is for Asian languages and Arabic and Hebrew. Rich metadata, structural semantics, the ability to point to locations in the file without having to have anchors pre-embedded in your file. It's called CFI. Syncing text to spoken audio, this kind of read aloud functionality, and text-to-speech. So those are all the things that are kind of the main things in EPUB 3, and it's been around for a couple of years. And even today, we still get this reaction about, does it actually work anywhere yet? Because of course it didn't work everywhere when it first came out. In fact, it didn't work anywhere because it was brand new. The whole point was to get the spec out so that the ecosystem of reading systems could evolve to conform to it, and it largely has done that, or is doing that. So there are lots and lots of environments. People, again, think of it as it's for the ebook readers, like iBooks, Kobo, Google Play, but a lot of platforms. So the two prominent educational platforms, actually it's a one now because VitalSource just bought CourseSmart, but both of those platforms for educational content, and they're completely dominant in U.S. education and increasingly across the world, both base their platforms on EPUB 3. Redium is a really interesting thing that you need to know about if you don't already. It's an open source project that is designed to implement all features of EPUB 3, and it's done it in two ways. It started out with basically kind of a proof of concept project to create a plugin for Chrome that is highly EPUB 3 compatible. So typically now, that's the appropriate reference platform. When you're testing out your EPUBs, I hope there's nobody from Adobe in the room, but stop using Adobe Digital Editions. It doesn't work anymore. They abandoned the advancing of that platform about a year and a half ago, and when you test out EPUBs on that platform, you're going to get misleading results because the EPUB, it's fine, it's that the platform is no longer working properly. They have joined Redium, so they're now part of this project. And the more important thing that Redium is doing, the immediate thing is this is available free for you right now. So just get the Chrome plugin, and it's a really good way to view your EPUBs. Redium SDK makes it easy and free for developers to implement all these features. Again, it's open source. It works in iOS, OS X, Android, and Windows. So it's basically fundamental software components in all of those operating systems, free for the taking, and free for anybody to adapt. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is the BISG support grid. This is a resource that helps document what features of EPUB 3 have been successfully implemented on which systems. It used to be just a static spreadsheet. We moved to a new generation of this a few months ago in February, where in partnership with the IDPF, and it's a very, very dynamic thing now. So you can basically, query this to say, I want to see all the features that this particular reading system can do. I want to see the Kindle app on a PC. What can it do? What can it do? I want to see iBooks, et cetera. Or you can look at specific features. You can say, I care about MathML. Which of these things can do MathML? Which can't? Which can do video? Which can't? Et cetera. So anyway, it's now epubtest.org. Really valuable resource. And keep in mind that it gets updated all the time because the reading system environment changes all the time. And actually, one of the effects that we were hoping this would have is what I indelicately refer to as the shaming factor, and it's working. The reading systems now go to this epubtest.org. They can use the tool privately to test out their own systems. And they're seeing the shortcomings, and they're actually addressing the shortcomings in their system because now the shortcomings are public. So this is actually helping the reading systems all get in alignment. So, one thing people want about standards is for them to just be standard, right? Which they equate with being static, not the same thing. Standards have to evolve. EPUB 3, is it finished now? Well, of course not. It was designed not to ever be finished. It was designed to be modular and extensible. But what that means is that what we've got now isn't going to change. It's just that it's going to keep getting added onto. More functionality will get added, but we're not going to make obsolete something that's already there. And so I'll just quickly give you some updates on what's happening in EPUB 3 land. A minor revision, EPUB 301. Actually, the reason I can't stay for the rest of the meeting tomorrow is I have to be at an IDPF board meeting where the kind of final approval of this is, 301 has gone through the review and public review and draft process and everything, and it's finally ready for formal approval. Changes in 301, it's not a huge thing, you can tell by the decimal points. Integrating fixed layout, which is basically controlling the page on in a reading system, as opposed to reflowable, which is what it's normally built for. One of the really useful things is we added a collection attribute, which lets you identify certain components within your EPUB as belonging together. That came out of the indexing work, because the indexing group realized that they sometimes needed to provide more than one file for the index, but collectively it had to be identified as the index is these three things. So that's what that lets you do. And then a big expansion to the kind of semantic vocabulary that's underpinning EPUB. I mentioned indexes. That also is at the final stage of approval. We've got another one coming up for dictionaries and glossaries. It's not quite as far along, but the draft was just published. Most active work, one of the two working groups that's active right now is one called Advanced Hybrid Layout, which is going to enable you to combine fixed layout and reflowable EPUBs. It's being driven by people in the manga and graphic novel and comics area because they have this need to manage regions of a page. And so there's the ability to manage regions of interest so that you can rearrange the chunks if you're looking at it on different kinds of screens. You're not stuck with this exact layout like you are with a PDF. And it turns out that that's also really valuable to magazines because magazines have that same need of rearranging the chunks while retaining more of a visual graphic design. And then the thing that I'm actually most excited about is EduPub, which is an EPUB profile for educational content. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because not all of you are involved in education. This goes K through 12 all the way through higher ed. But it's really a fantastic initiative to create what is in effect a profile of EPUB 3 that's optimized for doing what educational content needs to do. So textbooks, but also educational content in general, ingesting content into a learning management system, keeping track of what the learning objectives are, handling quizzes and tests and assessments, handling metrics, et cetera. Really interesting initiative. And it's actually a very broad-based initiative. IDPF is, of course, governing this EPUB profile called EduPub, also developing an open source widget library for these kind of interactive features like true, false, multiple choice, sliders, things like that. IMS Global is an organization you may not be familiar with, but they are responsible for a lot of key standards in the educational space: quiz and test interoperability, learning tools interoperability, Caliper, which is educational analytics, and the W3C is actively involved in this as well. And actually, today in New York at IDPF Digital Book, 4 new specifications are being announced and published. So the initial draft of the EduPub profile is being published today. A profile for open annotations in EPUB, very important thing. This allows people to add comments and interchange comments, et cetera, again, independent of the reading system and platform. EPUB distributable objects, which is something that I was in charge of, which basically lets you take those chunks of things out of your content and say, I need to take these things and the metadata associated with them and be able to pull them out and deliver them out to somebody else to use. So a video, a bunch of an interactive thing, a bunch of a quiz or test thing, an exercise, a chapter of a book, etc. And then lastly, widget packaging and integration, which is the kind of JavaScript functionality kind of that's behind it. 2 last things I want to point out to you, and I'm running out of time here. This also was just announced at BEA a day or so ago. It's called Flight Deck. I have no connection, by the way, this is not a commercial. I have no connection with any of these companies. But this one looks pretty interesting. It's from Firebrand, which many of you probably know. They've brought out this, it's an EPUB QA tool that runs EPUB check for you, but instead of just giving you the kind of techie report that you get out of EPUB check, it actually provides clear explanations of the issues that it found in your EPUBs, so very much more user-friendly. Reports on departures from best practices, because one thing that is kind of surprises a lot of people is that you can make an EPUB that's perfectly valid, proper EPUB, that's crap, because you've done so many things that are not really a good practice. Well, what this does is analyze, checks for those kinds of things. It also participated with all the major retailers to get their specifications built into it so that they're able to say, iBooks will reject this, or Kobo will reject this, or not. And again, this is an ongoing thing, so they're going to keep it up to date. It's a metadata editor, a lot of statistics, et cetera. So again, it's very early because the thing is just announced. I obviously haven't even had a chance to get any kind of real-time testing of it, but it just looks really promising. And since I was giving this talk, I thought you'd probably be interested in knowing about that. And then on the area of accessibility, I really just want to point you to Benetech as an organization and the Diagram Center, which is one of their activities. Tremendously useful. They've got a thing called Accessible Image Sample Book that basically teaches you how to properly handle accessibility for images in your publications of various sorts, charts, diagrams, maps, photographs, etc. They're not all the same. Bookshare is a service that they use that not only creates accessible versions of your publications for free, but it also manages the distribution of them only to people that are legitimately qualified to receive those because they're DRM free. Very, very useful. So, just to leave you with 3 TLAs, XML, W3C, OWP. Does everybody know what a TLA is? It's a 3-letter acronym. And an FLA, EPUB. So, there you go. Thank you. Todd, did I use up all my Q&A time, or do we have some Q&A time here?
I think you might have run through your Q&A time, but we can take a couple. We can take a couple minutes.
Nettie says I've got 2 minutes, so question there.
And I'm gonna repeat your question just for the recording. So.
I worked with the Journal of Economic Literature, and we had the section where the multi-dynamic issue where we have sections of communications and we publish books and journals. And we're starting to incorporate electronic ISBNs into our citations. And forgive me if this is wrong, I can hear this up, maybe indirectly with somebody else. But in that process, we've been trying to decide whether to make these sort of identifiers generic or as specific as possible. And I know that electronic versions are going to be evolving, different versions are going to be used. And based on the publishers, it seems as if the copyright information, the copyright page in each part of the book has different identifiers, EPUB, ebook. So I don't know what is going to be useful for our researchers and economists when they're looking at this section in these issues.
Okay. Again, since I overran my time, I won't give you the complete answer, but for 2 reasons. Also, both Nettie and Bruce are going to be talking about specific identifier kinds of things that are very relevant to your question. I can't resist putting my friend Todd on the spot that, fundamentally the thing that we're most lacking is the classic work identifier that the publishing industry has been struggling with. So, yeah, ISBN is a product identifier, so there's a bunch of them for all the different versions. EPUB is designed to accommodate all of them. In other words, you can put any number of identifiers within there. So I guess my main advice is fundamentally, one of your questions was specific versus general. I would say the most important distinctions between proprietary and standard. People need proprietary identifiers within their own workflows, but anything that you're doing that involves the outside world should be using standards. And there's lots of work been done on standards, on identifiers that the other speakers will be talking about.
One more question for Bill? And sorry, I didn't repeat that, but I think, Bill, you captured it in your statement. One more question for Bill before we move on?
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Bill. All right.